Hi everyone, and welcome back to Brand 2020. Please join me as we peer into a discussion by Langley Esquire advisors Dr. Nancy Snow and Benjamin Boaz. In today's episode, we will be discussing Cool Japan, the Tokyo Olympics, and the various ways Japan appeals to the outside world. Please enjoy.
So let us begin with this question. Why does branding Japan matter? Well, it seems kind of a matter of course to me, but then for some people, Japan might be too complex to be branded. So if you dare to brand Japan, well, that might sacrifice a complex beauty of Japanese culture or relevant issues. And another view is that branding might sound associated with the commercialism, which might not cut out for the promoting the cultural value. So these are the views that we received from the participants. So with this in mind, I just want to ask you, Ben and Nancy, to share your views on this issue. Thank you.
Okay, great. Oh, okay.
I guess I get this one.
Thank you. Do you want to start, or I'll just kick it off?
Go for it.
Ladies first. All right. Japan is already a brand in itself, and I don't think we would have such a crowd tonight if you all didn't already recognize that. And I want you to think about, for the internationals here, what brings you to Japan. There's a pull factor. In my case, Japan invited me over 22 years ago in 1993 when I was a US government official. And so I wasn't pulled here by, say, my love of Japanese film or animation or manga, whatever it may be. I didn't speak the language, but I thought, sure, I'll go to Japan. I wasn't even an Asia specialist. I have subsequently, though, fallen in love with Japan and have gotten involved in the business of how can I enact this role of a cultural mediator. So I still don't speak the language. Let me put that out there. I'm very, very transparent about that. Doesn't mean I don't want to. But the irony is that I've been on a Fulbright here, I've been on an Abe Fellowship. Thus far, it has not come along with a Japanese language class. However, I want to add that it is possible in nation branding that you can get to know a culture. Did this turn off? You can get to know a culture. I think we lost maybe the power altogether, didn't we?
We can project.
And guess what? I don't need it. My point number one would be, and I'm going to let Benjamin speak afterwards, is that Japan's hurdle is language in part, because most people in the world don't speak Japanese. So if there were anything I could emphasize tonight, it would be make Japan more accessible to those who may not know the language, but who have a love and affinity for Japan as a culture and for its people. Open it up to people, and don't make language and knowing Japanese the hurdle that people have to get over, because what we hear all the time is Japanese is such a hard language, and it becomes a barrier, and people then lose their enthusiasm. Okay, take it over, Ben.
Thank you, Nancy. Is this mic on? Can everyone hear me? Okay, good. Well, to echo what Nancy is saying, I think that accessibility is really key. Nation branding is for the nation's audience. It is not for the actual citizens of the nation itself. Japanese people already know Japan. Japanese people do not need a brand in order to understand Japan better. But without some sort of a controlled message, a controlled, unified brand of Japan, people outside of Japan who do not know Japanese, who are not familiar with the culture, who do not have the years necessary to go into a very detailed understanding of this country, will not understand things and will go off on their own directions and will misunderstand things. Speaking of misunderstanding, there is one thing that I guess I've been going in and out of this country for the better part of 10 years now. One thing I've learned to say at the beginning of a public event in Japan about Japan, which is to say that any criticism that we might have of this country, of the government, of policies, is out of love. And out of an intention to make Japan better, to improve Japan's messaging ability to the outside world. We are not criticizing the government because we do not like Japan. We love Japan. I've loved Japan ever since I was a little boy. Nancy has loved Japan
Since I was a very young adult woman.
A young adult woman.
Very young.
So please, anything that we happen to say that it sounds like it stings a little bit, or it sounds like, oh, well, why is Benjamin saying that? Maybe Benjamin doesn't really appreciate all that Japan has done for him. I do. This country has been an enormous influence in my life. Part of the reason I wanted to come up here and take a seat in front of all of you is because I would like to help this country as much as I can in its messaging strategy towards the outside world, particularly as it approaches the 2020 Olympics. So, getting back to the idea of accessibility and a branding message that is simple and easy for people to understand, as Nancy touched on beforehand, Japan is a very detailed-oriented culture, to put it simply, and I think you have a couple of very nice pull quotes on your handout there. So it's very, very hard to encompass a focus on details into some sort of a brand. And this is actually one thing which I was hoping we could both hit on tonight. How do you take that and how do you put it into an easy to understand message for people who don't necessarily know anything about Japan at all?
I don't even know if I need this, right? Well, can I answer you with an anecdote? Getting back to my first visit to Japan, I don't know how many may have had this experience, but because of the detail, because of the idea of Japan having a deep culture and a complicated culture, not just the language, but the understanding of Japanese society, when I first arrived at Narita, when we got on the bus, it doesn't matter. We were given a do's and don'ts. That was the first thing I was given by the woman who was going to lead us around for 3 weeks. Now, you know what happened to my mind when I was reading this? It made me very nervous because I'm a rules breaker. I make mistakes all the time. I'm one of these goofy sort of fly around and, American types. And I thought, I'm in a very formal culture. See, you all know what I'm talking about. A very formal culture, and I'm going to have to walk on eggshells. And so it didn't automatically make me want to rush back here because I thought, I'm too old. How can I possibly understand this culture? Now I've learned over time, though, that it is accessible, but I do think that there is a challenge in this notion of the uniqueness of Japan, that can become a bit of a complication in people's minds, a bit of a distance maker. And so we ought to talk about that tonight in terms of the branding of Japan as a unique culture, unlike anywhere else. The foreign media do it too. How many of you all saw the BBC film a couple of years ago, No Sex Please, We're Japanese, was the title. Do you remember that? Yeah. Great title, huh? Brought in eyeballs. But the woman, Anita Rao, who was the moderator, she was in Shibuya Crossing, and she said, I'm in Japan, which is like no other place on the planet, something along those lines. And that's very typical in the coverage of Japan. And it's sort of a symbiotic relationship because Japan's kind of promoting uniqueness in the Nihon Jinran, right? And then in turn, the foreign press will come here and cover a lot of the kind of wacky, weird stories. So it makes it somewhat impenetrable on both sides. So your take on that?
This uniqueness and how it plays into the Nihon Jinran, I think is a very interesting concept to bring up. And it's It's a very dangerous one, because on the one hand, this culture certainly is unique. Japan contains things that do not exist in other cultures. Some of it people have attributed to climate, some of it have attributed to a history, particularly a lack of colonization. There's definitely something to it, but if you focus so much on uniqueness, you create this sort of echo chamber, where it's like, oh, what's unique about Japan? It's that it's unique. What is there to understand about Japan? Oh, well, that it's that it can't be understood. And when you get into discussions, particularly within kind of like a Japanese sphere, that is to say Japanese policymakers, generally monolingual Japanese environments, you hear these sorts of secondary references to Japanese uniqueness, how much foreigners love that Japan is unique, how it's important that Japan maintain its differences from the outside world, but no one ever actually defines what those differences are. Now, I wish I could tell you right now that we're going to define it here once and for all, but of course that's something that would probably take a little bit longer than one evening session. One thing, though, that I would like to briefly touch on is safety, which Nancy mentioned before in terms of accessibility. Safety and accessibility, I think, are two sides of the same coin. Why is it so easy, for example, for Americans like us to come to Japan, even though they don't necessarily know anything about the culture, don't know the language at all? It's because the country is safe. You can come here and be clueless. You can arrive in Narita Airport and you can make your way into Tokyo without being able to speak a word of Japanese. I don't think that that's necessarily true of a lot of other countries in the region. I mean, it's not to say that you can't go to China and make your way from the Chinese airport to your hotel. Of course you can do that. But it's probably a lot easier in Japan. There's probably a lot less things to worry about. So Japan, a country of no worries, Japan, a country of safety. It's not necessarily the sexiest thing which you could say about the country, but it is certainly something that's incredibly unique about Japan. When people ask me what I like most about this country, I say chian, the safety. You can wander around at any time of night and you'll be safe. You can generally knock on the door of almost any establishment in this country, and even though you might not be necessarily completely welcomed, nothing particularly bad is going to happen to you. Now, I'm not encouraging people to go out and say, oh, wait a minute, no, Benjamin told me I can go out and knock on any door in this country. You know, I've always wondered about that yama-gu something or other. I'll go and find that out for myself. But it is to say, I think it's something that sets Japan apart a lot from the rest of the world, something that certainly dovetails directly into tourism, and I think something that a lot of Japanese people take for granted. There's a lot of references to, oh, if I go to a foreign country, I don't know what will happen to me because foreign countries have crime and theft and things like that. And that sort of thing gets tied into Nihonjin and occasionally gets exaggerated, but there's certainly a kernel of truth to it. Japan is a safe country. Japan is a country where no matter who comes in and no matter what they're interested in, they can find what they're looking for because it's safe and accessible. Now, the tricky thing about branding this is that whatever the target of that person's interest is, you have to leave up to them. Now, a lot of messaging efforts I see coming out of Japanese corporations and the government are this sort of search for what's the coolest thing about Japan, or what do all the foreigners love? It's sushi, we have to make a sushi branded campaign. And to borrow another Japanese word that may or may not be popular abroad, it's a little bit mottainai. Why limit your audience? Not everyone likes sushi. I mean, the same people who say sushi is what foreigners love will also say 5 minutes later, oh, you can't possibly understand the culture of sushi in Japan. It's something that's uniquely Japanese. Putting those sorts of things aside and taking a step back, kind of looking more at the medium, Japan is a country in which if someone is interested in sushi, they can go out and find what they are interested in. If they want to find a famous fugu parlor, which in any other country would be incredibly dangerous, they can find it in Japan. They can find a safe place, they can find a delicious place. Again, not always the same in every other country. Japan is a place where you can find what you like.
Let me interject, because I do think that in terms of branding, we're getting off on food, and that's very prominent in nation branding Japan. But with public diplomacy, yeah, these are irrelevant. With public diplomacy, it has to do with how you also market policies and how you explain your government policies. Traditionally, public diplomacy was about government to publics, and it's pretty serious. It has to do with national security. So in fact, the brand face of Japan, frankly, is not sushi, it's Prime Minister Abe. It's the diet. And I tell you this because Abe, coming in again in 2012, got people interested in Japan again. There is no question. Whatever you want to say about the policies of the administration, put those aside, he brought the world's attention to Japan. Now, the risk with that, because I'm more of a comparative public diplomacy person, we did the same thing when Obama was elected in 2008. We put all our eggs in one basket. I keep bringing up egg references, walking on eggs and then this. And Obama's numbers, though, have fallen, right? They've slipped. He was reelected, but there is a lot of polarization now in American society. When you put a lot of your branding around one particular figure or one particular administration, it's risky because when you look at all the data about who do we trust, who do we find credible, around the world we're losing trust in our public institutions, including governments. So I'm not just referencing Abe, this is around the world. So if you're going to be more effective in your nation branding, don't you all think that we need to broaden the conversation and broaden the number of representatives of Japan and its relationship with the world? So this is what I've been writing about the last 2 years, is that nation branding is everybody's business. And for all of you here tonight, you should see your role, whether you're international, whether you're native Japanese, as a person who is a citizen diplomat. And we can talk more about that. But I mean, I'm not disagreeing with anything you have to say, but this sushi diplomacy, I think, is just a little bit limiting. There's a lot more to it. And not everything about nation branding is just products. It's also, again, policies, and policies are always in.
Can Japanese brands be loved, promoted further by people other than Japanese? And then in this regard, we have a lot of previous examples, or the success or failures. So from your perspective, do you think the branding strategy of Japan is successful currently? Or if not, what is the reason and how can we move forward?
Can I do the joke?
Yes, you can do the joke.
Okay. So when it comes to perceptions of Japan, there's a joke that I like to tell, and I hope that you'll all indulge me in it. So one day there's a book authorship contest, an international book authorship contest. All the best authors of the world, one per country, have to write a book on a single theme. And this year's theme is elephants. So everyone writes a book, and the top 3 finalists are decided. And it's an American, it's a French person, and it's a Japanese. And clearly we're going to go a little bit into stereotypes here, but you'll see my point at the end. So what are the 3 finalist books? The American's book is The Secret of the Elephant's Success. And the French person has his book, and it's The Hidden Sex Lies of the Elephants. And the Japanese book is What Do the Elephants Think of Japan? Now, if you look very closely, look around you, you'll see that the people who laughed the most here are probably the non-Japanese members of the audience. Now, I don't mean to create divisions within the audience, but the point which I want to make from this is that, generally speaking, Japanese people thinking about their own country take attention on their own country and take attention on their own brand for granted. Domestic news in Japan constantly has programs, contents about what do the foreigners think of us. NHK has a long-running series, Cool Japan. Is this cool? Is that cool? What do the foreigners think? But when you talk to the average foreigner, that is to say the average person in the world who's not Japanese, and there's a lot of them, for the most part, they're not thinking about Japan at all. There is no real nuanced, deep understanding. Us here up on this stage, we're very much exceptional. Even people in the audience are exceptional. Most people are never going to understand that much about Japan, and that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But in order to get into the mindset of creating new fans of Japan or appealing to the average foreigner, you have to accept the idea that no one in that population is going to have a correct and nuanced understanding of this country. And I think that that can be a little bit difficult for a lot of Japanese people to approach.
Okay, how about you?
Well, now, is this the critical part? No, I'm just kidding. I think one of the things that should make everybody relax is that every culture has contradictions. And I have a handout for you all. And not that I want you to read along, but there's I've just finished reading Taggart Murphy's Japan and the Shackles of the Past. Terrific read. And he talks about when it comes to Japan, there's often this, well, we can't quite understand it because it's so situational, but you have to know the context. It's very particularistic. But any culture that's full of contradictions means, by definition, that there's something there for everyone. And if you are marketing it monolithically, that this is a homogeneous society, that there isn't that much diversity, then you lose a lot of people because there is a lot of diversity. There's diversity in class, in gender, in an underclass, in the rural versus urban. There's so much going on besides different ethnicities, but you've got to allow people to celebrate the sort of ups and downs. And I view this culture as very perfectionistic. And maybe I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong, because he's been here a lot longer. But I think initially that was very intimidating to me, the perfectionism. When I compete with myself, well, I just said it, I compete with myself more than I compete with others. That's my own sort of perfectionism. But I think as a society, there's a lot of intergroup competition. And so we need to relax more in this society, both foreigners and Japanese, and really embrace the opportunity that Japan has to get back up on the world stage. Not just in 2020. Our title was about beyond 2020, but how about 2016? I was just reading about Issei Shrine and the G7 meeting at the end of May, when you're going to have all of the top economies, all the leaders here. And why did Prime Minister Abe choose this site? Actually went to the site where the shrine is because he wants to celebrate the culture of Japan, the tradition, the spirit of the Japanese people. So the world's attention will be on Japan this year. Last year, we thought it got a lot of attention. We haven't seen anything yet. So I think that we need to, in that spirit then, enrich global communications. There's no question. I've talked to probably hundreds of Japanese over the last couple of years for my book that's coming out in May. Anyway, that's my commercial. But they have told me almost to a person that global communications needs to be improved here, whether it's online, whether it's a website, information from a university. You've got to share more information. And that way you get more interest, because if people are searching online and they can't find much information about Japan, they're going to go on to another country. So let's enrich global communications as we prepare our path toward 2020.
Well, thank you, Nancy.
Can I follow up
yes.
on that? So to move from the conceptual of improving global communications to the practical of how specifically do you improve that in Japan, one point I was very much looking forward to making tonight is for specific Japanese organizations that want to get a better message out to the non-Japanese community should consult non-Japanese. It's a simple concept, and it does not happen very much in Japan. I could name a million examples of times when it did not happen, but I'm sure that everyone in the audience has a couple of examples already in mind. Let me instead show a positive example, which I have included in today's handouts. It's the one that looks like a policy paper. If you turn all the way to the back page, you will see that the authors of this paper took common Japanese map symbols for landmarks. The very last page is the old symbol for the temple, which many Westerners misunderstand, proposed a new symbol, and went out and asked different populations of non-Japanese which one was easier to understand. And the results are quite clear. I mean, they're exactly what you would expect, but it's just to say that when you go out and ask people, you get clear answers that are easy to apply. Not just the temple example, the page right before it, the hotel example, the H with a circle around it reminds many people of a hospital or a helipad. The bed is a lot clearer. Now, it's not to say that Japan should go out and remake all of its semiotic symbols in order to cater to the needs of foreigners. That's not my point at all. My point is that if Japan is to improve its global communications, Japan must, in all of these Japan decision-making bodies, include a direct foreign voice. And the reason why this government paper, in my opinion, was able to go out and do real outreach and was able to go out and produce results that really do resonate with foreign readers is because it had a foreigner on its committee, Professor Robert Campbell of the University of Tokyo, who speaks perfect Japanese, very, very intelligent, and is willing to say his frank opinion out loud. More government committees should have the presence of a non-Japanese who speaks fluent Japanese and is willing to say his opinion out loud. It is so rare to have a committee like that. There should be more of that.
Thank you, Benson.
Yeah.
Another handout that we distribute is the your essay that you recently released, Cool Japan is Not Cool.
Yes.
Right? So could you kindly expand on your key message that you want to deliver through this essay? You simply mentioned that we should consult more on the non-Japanese when it comes to promoting Japanese value. But
Yes.
then any other issues that you want to keep our attention on?
Really, directly asking foreigners who are in a position to speak frankly, and I mean, I speak Japanese, so perhaps I'm biased towards Japanese speakers, but it isn't to say that you should only speak to bilingual foreigners. Speak to any foreigner who is in a position to give you their frank opinion on things. I think this is the most important message that I have in the essay. Most of the rest of the essay is examples of things where this did not happen. For example, Cool Japan itself, which is a branding name which most foreigners don't actually think is that cool. But it's perfectly understandable why a Japanese decision-making body might pick that name. It's because within the Japanese monolithic sphere, perhaps I could say echo chamber, kuru, a foreign word, sounds cool in the same way that je ne sais quoi sounds cool to English speakers. It's not absurd, and it doesn't mean that whoever made the decision is silly or not good at their job. It's not that at all. It's that there aren't enough diverse voices within the decision-making process. And the solution is just so simple. Include more diverse voices, include more non-Japanese voices. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, but let's talk about why that's not happening. I mean, why isn't it happening if it's so simple? And in part, it's because this is a consensus-driven culture. And having foreign diverse voices is seen as perhaps inefficient. It slows down the process. My understanding, again, of the culture is that you have everybody sort of on board, and it's all go. Even if there is some dissent, I don't think we have enough of a celebration of dissent here, whether it's international or domestic. There is not a real benefit to that. And it's not me saying this. This is what entrepreneurs are saying this. Both Japanese and international say we need to have more risk takers. But we don't have a system in place that celebrates the risk takers. So the risk takers, like I can take a risk because, well, I can always go home to the United States if it doesn't work out, right?
We hope that you don't.
Yeah, no. I'd like to stay here for the duration, but it's not going to be as much of a risk for me to speak my mind. One, it's expected more because I'm a foreigner, I'm an American, and I'm outspoken. I put a lot of my work online. People know that I'm very outspoken. So they would expect me to be more blunt. And but what I worry about the Japanese persons, and I hope in the Q&A we can get into this more, you know, there's a much greater risk when you're in a system where there hasn't been as much of this questioning and kind of speaking up, because as I said, it's seen as, well, don't rock the boat. And the process has worked very well here in the post-war period with the economic miracle and so-called, as we called it then. But now in the last couple of decades, we haven't had this this dynamism, and so now you and I would say we need more foreign diverse voices. But I think there are some major problems built into the system as to why that's not happening, even though it seems like a simple solution.
I like your message very much that let us celebrate or embrace the value of dissent, right? Disconsent. And then I think there are a lot of new initiatives in the government towards a new Olympic game in 2020, or Japan House to promote the Japanese value. So as a person who have been interacting with the government of Japan, could you give us examples that you feel that you face some barriers because of the culture, or the culture of not accepting this consent?
Who, me?
Yeah, right.
I got one.
Right, sure.
Very, very simple problem. Some of you perhaps have been to the wonderful ward of Nakano in Tokyo, which is an excellent place to go to. Those of you who have been to Nakano, or those of you who know of Nakano, know that there is a very famous landmark within the ward called Nakano Broadway. Nakano Broadway, I think, probably draws more domestic tourists than any other place in Nakano, and it's very well known. But for people who come to JR Nakano Station for an errand, for anything like that, and have an opportunity to visit the Broadway, there's a problem in that there is no clear sign in the station that points to where Broadway is. No signs at all. There's a tiny little pamphlet that you can get if you know where the pamphlet is, which kind of defeats the purpose of having one. No sign within the station, no sign outside of the station. It's a bit of a problem, and one would think that it would have a simple enough solution, put up a sign. But because the people who control the station and the people who control the area in front of the station, the people who control the Shotengai shopping street that goes beyond that, and the people who control Broadway, and Broadway, by the way, is mainly a residential complex. Not many people know that. The upper 5th to 10th floors are all residences. Because they all can't get on the same page, something as simple as putting a sign so that more people come and spend money, which is to the benefit of everyone, does not get done. They should put a sign up.
Wow. Can we just go put a sign up?
If I do it, they know who I am. If you do it, well, now there's a video recording of me telling you to.
You're a translator, so if you can do the sign, I'm happy to go, because I feel very safe at 3 in the morning where I can put the sign up. Yeah, that's right.
But then somebody would take it off.
I know, that's true. That's right, and there'll be, CCTV will show,
So Nancy, how do you look at the current government initiatives of promoting Japan to abroad?
Oh boy, you're really putting me on the spot, aren't you?
Yeah, because you are the specialist of the public diplomacy. So
you know what? I have some good news. I don't want to be the curmudgeon tonight. So I want to celebrate some movement towards what I think is raising Japan's profile in the world. And one of these, maybe you all have heard about Japan House. Japan House is an initiative, a real bricks and mortar project to build these community centers, these outreach centers in London, Sao Paulo, and Los Angeles. And of course, you could say on the one hand, well, that's just a very meek answer to, say, the Confucius Institutes, which are projected to perhaps be at 1,500 by 2020. The Japanese government is not trying to compete with the Confucius Institutes. What I like about Japan House, because I went to interview them when they got the money for this last year in the spring, was that it's going to be driven, the content, the programming of each house will be driven by the community leaders in the respective communities. As I said earlier, just to connect the dots, we don't trust our governments around the world as we used to. So if you're going to have a government-funded program, you have to have third parties. You have to have some decentralization of the content. so that people feel like, well, it's not a propaganda mission. And so I was delighted to hear that they are working with community leaders, and oh, by the way, not even necessarily community leaders who are Japan experts, rather community leaders who know the networks in those respective cities. So take a look at an example like Japan House as something which I think is a good thing. Now, where I think the Japanese government could do a lot more, everyone knows, I'm sure, because you're a smart crowd, this year is the 60th anniversary of Japan's membership in what organization? International organization, the UN. Does everybody know this? Does everyone know that Japan is now sitting as a non-permanent member on the UN Security Council? So where I think the Japanese government could do more is to reach out, communicate with the world that we are a leader in multilateral donation, in leadership in that area. Traditionally, this is where Japan has been very strong. But why not be more of a mediator in peace and human rights and peace-building missions? I think it's a natural for Japan. And the Japanese people I've talked to have great affection for the UN and for UNESCO. I love UNESCO too. So the UN in the United States has more of a mixed reputation. Not everybody's so crazy about the UN. But I think for Japan it's a natural fit. So are they doing enough to really, in a post-Fukushima era, promote more of this global problem-solving brand? I don't think so. I think you can do a lot more. And as I said earlier, don't just leave the branding up to the cabinet office or to the prime minister's office, whoever it might be, because you just can't afford to rely on the reputation of that individual or administration to carry you along.
Thank you, Nancy. Now I learned that the Japan House is one of the examples that the Japanese actually use the existing local networks so that they can identify what is preferred or how they can approach to the people who might have an interest, potential interest to Japan. And can we do the same thing in Japan, which is related to the question that we received? Quote, how should Japan make the best use of foreigners in Japan to promote Japanese brands abroad? Benson, do you have any thoughts about this? Because we have here.
You are also.
Putting bilingual foreigners on the policy committees, I think, is just so important, and it does not happen nearly enough. I'm sorry to be repeating myself, but I look at the membership rosters of relevant committees. I reference them in the essay that I've given to all of you today. It doesn't happen enough. It needs to happen more. Non-Japanese voices need to make their way into those current echo chambers and shake things up a little bit. Japan is most certainly a consensus-based society. I mean, that is without a doubt true. But at the same time, I think that many people within these bodies, these organizations, really are yearning for a different opinion, or really do realize that things aren't actually going anywhere and things need to move in a new and different direction. Looking forward to new and different directions, I think, is what brought a lot of people here tonight. I think what keeps the new and different directions from rising to the level of public discourse and committee discourse is that no one wants to be responsible for saying them. So bring in a foreigner and have them say it.
Thank you. Well, Nancy, you prepared the slide on the language. You mentioned about the barrier of language at the beginning of this session. And then would you like to mention about this chart, which is the number of learners of foreign languages?
That's
Obviously,
right.
it looks, English has the biggest portion.
Well, again, I'm going to be a broken record, but I wrote a piece last summer in June for the Japan Times called Turning Japan's Universities into Genuine Global Partners. And I thought it was real sort of middle of the road. And apparently it got shared with a lot of universities because what I did was I compared the English language competence of the students I dealt with at Tsinghua University in Beijing to my experience in various Japanese classrooms. I've taught at Sophia and I've done a lot of guest lecturing. And so I just pointed out my experience and the level of enthusiasm for English in China or South Korea or Taiwan. You all probably are aware of this. It's not just that they start learning English at a younger age, but it's also a different mentality that I've encountered. And I could be wrong here, so I like to just throw things out. But I have a sense, the Japanese language, it's a beautiful language. It is a perfectionistic language. It is a super hard language, as the State Department says. There is this sort of protective nature around the language. And I'm concerned sometimes that Japanese people maybe feel that if they master English or another language, somehow it's going to take away from their Japanese-ness, from their sort of ability in Japanese. And the Chinese don't see it that way. The Koreans don't see it that way. They see English as a tool of understanding and communication. It is an add-on. So it doesn't take anything away, it enhances who you are. And if you have any interest in being a global business person or a global citizen, or you want to be a world traveler, learn English. And I say that as someone coming from a country where English is not the official language. I taught at a university in Southern California that where the majority of the students spoke another language in the home, not English. It was Spanish or other Asian languages. So it will make your life a lot easier. So I shared this. This is from the Washington Post. This was published very recently because I'm often told, well, there are a lot more Chinese speakers, but this is looking at first and second language. And so when people are learning a second language, more often than not, they're learning English because it has become the tool of getting around in the world, and going online is still the experience of English. So I'm all for learning another language. I lived in Germany. I speak German, but it's still sort of different here in that. And I also don't buy for a minute, because we talked about this yesterday, that the Japanese don't speak English. I think that's a very negative stereotype. They do, but it's a different approach that you have to take. But I think a lot of internationals who haven't been here, they might fly over Japan because they want to go to a place where they think more English is spoken. And I found, again, how do we communicate? We don't even always have to communicate in words, as you all know.
Thank you, Nancy. I mean, I found it's very encouraging because your message is to keep us away from the perfectionism.
That's right.
Just learn English for fun and then enhance our our ability.
That's right.
To be a player of the promoter of Japan, or to connector with the people who are interested in Japan.